Hi everyone, Janelle here. I'm a functional nutritionist, doctor of natural medicine, and creator of the Empowered Midlife Method. This is my podcast where we talk about midlife wellness in the mountains. I am on a mission to help women not only feel better and age their best, but also to help women understand their unique body, to take ownership in their health, to awaken their hormone wisdom, and step into their power around growing older. Today on the show, I have Cynthia Thurlow. I have followed and genuinely enjoyed Cynthia's work for several years now, so I'm really excited for this conversation. Cynthia is a nurse practitioner, two-time TEDx speaker, international speaker, and the founder and CEO of the Everyday Wellness Project. With more than 25 years of experience in health and wellness, she is a globally recognized expert in perimenopause, menopause, intermittent fasting, and women's metabolic health. She is also a best-selling author and has a new book out called The Menopause Gut: Balance Your Microbiome to Reclaim Your Health in Midlife and Beyond. Today, we are diving into the fascinating connection between the gut and hormones in midlife, how changing hormones impact the gut and the microbiome, and how the gut influences our hormones and the symptoms we experience. This conversation is packed with insight, science, and practical ways to better understand your body in midlife, and I think you are going to love it. Welcome, everybody. I am so thrilled to have Cynthia Thurlow here with me today to discuss one of my favorite topics. So welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So the thing I am truly personally most passionate about is helping women really take agency in their health so that they can feel better. And the gut is the number one way we can do this, or one of the number one ways we can do this. So I'm so excited to have you here. And maybe you could start us off by sharing why you chose to focus on the gut in menopause.
Yeah, it's interesting. Life imitates art. And so I start the book off talking about this romantic Moroccan vacation that I took with my husband and how we ate the same food, did the same activities, and one of us got very sick and the other did not. And I don't think at that moment I fully appreciated physiologically what's changing so dramatically in our bodies in perimenopause when our immune system takes a hit, our inflammatory pathways are heightened, how much more susceptible we are to opportunistic infections with a decline in estrogen. And so, I went about that trip, got ghastly food poisoning, like the worst I've ever had. Didn't feel good the rest of my trip. Went home, went on a trip to Toronto like 2 months later for my first TED Talk, got food poisoning again. Not kidding. They had an E. coli outbreak, and I just happened to eat in the restaurant that was implicated in this food poisoning outbreak, and then ended up in the hospital 6 weeks later, literally fighting for my life. So that's the backstory, like the personalized story of I picked up Giardia while in Morocco, which is what gave me these constellation of symptoms. I was quite sick in the hospital. And then you fast forward through years of having my own podcast, being in to interview all these experts, and the realization that there's so much more to perimenopause and menopause than just brain, bone, and heart health. And I started to really look specifically at the gut microbiome and how these changes in hormones and neurotransmitters are so profoundly impacting every single system in the body, but we don't talk about it enough. It's like every researcher that would come on and would share a vignette on nitric oxide or the microbiome, and then a clinician would come on and share some insights that they found around autoimmune disease risk. And I started to kind of piece together there's a larger discussion that needs to be had. Obviously, gut health is incredibly nuanced because it's never just one thing, it's multiple things that are happening all at once. And so I felt like, there's a lot of great books out there on perimenopause and menopause, but no one's talking about the gut. And so in 2024, my editor at Penguin actually said, "Do you think you have another book in you?" And I said, "Well, I have an idea." And so I literally wrote literally one page of ideas, whereas my previous book proposal was 100 pages and was a lot of work. This was pretty quick through it. And she said, "I want you to start immediately." So the book really came out of both my personal story of what it was like to get horrific food poisoning, which then led to this long hospitalization. And then, 25 years of experience of working with patients. And then also the podcast just really gave me this unique lens. And I felt like it was part of the conversation. It was an important part of the conversation that I hope will not only change the lay public's perception of gut health in this very important inflection point in midlife, but also clinicians that are taking care of women at this stage of our lives to be thinking proactively, because something as seemingly benign as oral contraceptive use at the age of 14, 15, 16, or even Depo-Provera, our contraceptive choices when we're young women do have a long-term impact on the microbiome and how it evolves and shifts and changes. And so I think that it's an opportunity to explore an otherwise intangible part of our physiology, because the gut microbiome is not tangible like the heart, the lungs are. And so a lot of my patients are like, I don't even know where it is. And why do I care about it? So the book is really to build awareness, educate women about their bodies, and then, quite honestly, help my fellow clinicians out, because I learned so much while writing this book. I thought I knew a lot. And there is a lot to the conversation, but the research is evolving, and I think that we will ultimately get another clinical indication for HRT to support the microbiome, because it's that significant of a shift with those changes in hormones.
Well, I can't wait to dig into it. But it really is so fascinating that the gut is really two sides of the same coin, right? On one side, we have our changing hormones in midlife changing our gut. And then on the other side, we have our gut impacting directly our hormones and how we experience midlife, like so many of the symptoms. So it's almost overwhelming to me to talk about the gut sometimes, because there's just so many ways that it's impacted by hormones and impacts hormones and changes in midlife. So maybe we could start by digging into one side of that, and how, when our hormones change, estrogen, progesterone in midlife, when they go through that wild fluctuation, how does that, what are a few ways that impacts our gut? Even
Yeah,
if,
so
we do nothing else, like just those changing hormones.
Yeah, so I always like to talk about estrogen because that's the hormone we know the most about. And really, it's the estradiol is the predominant form of estrogen our bodies make prior to menopause. And so estradiol has a lot of unique facets to it. Number one, it's anti-inflammatory. Number two, it is integral for the interface. So we think about our small intestinal lining, it's one cell layer thick, so it's easily damaged, whether it's with antibiotic use, toxins we're exposed to, chronic stress. I'm sure we'll get into all of that. But as estrogen is declining, if we think about the small intestinal lining as a brick and mortar structure, the mortar is the estrogen. So as estrogen is declining, more likely to experience leaky gut, much more likely to see this rise in autoimmune conditions, 4 to 5 times more likely to be diagnosed in midlife. And so when I went through my medical training, just to give you some context, there are probably 20 or 30 autoimmune conditions that we learned about, whereas now there's over 100. Some estimates are somewhere between 70 to 100, but I'll tip it towards the larger number. But things like chronic Lyme, as well as long haul COVID, are some of the newer ones that we're starting to find. But estrogen has a particular role for the immune system function. So not only is it helping to fortify that small intestinal lining, but it's also intricately interwoven with the immune system function. And what happens as estrogen is declining is that we get more opportunistic infections, aka the Giardia that I picked up in Morocco. We're more likely to have this more pro-inflammatory response. So we're not as able to fight off viruses. Vaccines are less effective, and I don't state that to be political at all. It's just that is what the research supports. And in the setting of these alterations in estrogen, we know that we also get changes in the estrobolome. So this is a special part of the microbiome. So when we're talking about the gut microbiome, it's 40 trillion bacteria, viruses, fungi, and protozoa that are part of the large intestine or colon. And a subsect of that is the estrobolome, which are bacteria that are designed to help break down, process, and eliminate estrogen. And what can happen in the setting of less circulating estrogen is that we may struggle to properly detoxify. And I'm sure we'll talk about this. So there's two phases of detoxification in the liver, and then it goes to the gut. But if you can't properly break down the estrogen into water-soluble compounds, if your bile acids aren't working effectively, or if you're not eating enough fiber, you may not package up the excess estrogen and effectively poop it out of the body. That's an oversimplification, but just to kind of make it clear, I would say package it up like a present and get rid of it. It can get recirculated. And yes, you can be low in estrogen and the estrogen mimicking chemicals we're exposed to, things that are in food, personal care products, cumulatively over time, you may be, in a sense, you may actually get those estrogen effects that can be magnified. So the brain fog, the breast tenderness, the weight loss resistance, the vasomotor symptoms, hot flashes, etc., can all be magnified if you can't properly break down estrogen. So estrogen becomes really important. And I think from the perspective of talking about symptoms, I always say the gut is really at the crux of most of the symptoms we experience as women. When someone's telling me they're having a lot of vasomotor symptoms, a lot of hot flashes, I'm automatically thinking about how is your estrogen processing going on in your body? Is your gut healthy to begin with? Because I think what happens for a lot of women, they don't understand the cumulative years of antibiotic therapy, synthetic on body identical hormones that they're taking for contraception or to control menstrual cycle irregularities or even symptoms or even acne are setting us up for having a less than hospitable gut microbiome heading into this perimenopause to menopause transition. But estrogen is probably at the forefront of a lot of the discussion and research about the microbiome. Obviously, progesterone plays a role as well as testosterone. And so estrogen to me is really the queen of the gut microbiome and ensuring that we have adequate amounts of estrogen, very much the Goldilocks effect, the right amount at the right time can be a key differentiator for whether or not we're experiencing quite a bit of symptoms or not a lot of symptoms in midlife.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And you speak into two things that are so extraordinary. One is that the gut really is that interface between our body. Because we absorb things into our bloodstream from our gut, it can go systemic in our body. It is just amazing that it can have such an impact all over our body in so many different ways. And it's so exciting too, because it's an area we can go upstream and step back and have such a big impact on our whole body and our hormones. And so while it's complicated, it's really exciting to me because there's so much room for impacting our health and how we feel and our hormones. So everything you said just speaks into both of those things that I get really excited about. So thank you. And so with changing estradiol, then that in and of itself changes our microbiome. Is that right?
Absolutely. And we start making weaker forms of estrogen. And this is why my book title, The Menopause Gut, is a double entendre. It's talking descriptively about what patients will tell me about that they get body composition changes in midlife. But as your estrogen is declining, your body is looking for a foreseeable, workable solution. And so estrone is a weaker form of estrogen that's made in our adipose tissue. And so we don't like the pesky body composition changes, but our body is effectively looking for alternatives, especially in the setting. And this is a very personal decision between the respective woman and their prescriber in terms of whether or not HRT is part of the conversation. But before we even get to that point, it's really leaning into lifestyle as medicine. This is what I think is so critically important that you can be on HRT and still not be feeling well. And a lot of it has to do with really getting granular about sleep quality, really managing our stress, looking at anti-inflammatory nutrition and even meal frequency. It doesn't have to be overt intermittent fasting, but for a lot of my patients, they just eat too frequently and they eat too many of the wrong types of foods. And so that and exercise, which I know is a huge focus of your work, helping women understand the right types of exercise at the right time, because all of these variables, I call it majoring in the majors, but these four majors are the most important things that we can be doing because they can positively or negatively impact the microbiome. I'll give you an example. So, a lot of women struggle with insomnia in certain parts of their menstrual cycle, usually in the luteal phase, right before they start menstruating. And this can carry on into menopause as well. But what I find for a lot of women is that stress management becomes a larger discussion. We know that cortisol is not a bad hormone, but sadly, it's one of the few hormones that goes up in middle life, unlike everything else that starts to decline. And we know that cortisol can be incredibly caustic to the body. I'm not talking about if you were to measure your cortisol right now or mine, I'm sure it's elevated a little bit because we're engaged in this conversation, we're enjoying this conversation. That's very different than chronic stress, which is what most women are dealing with. And so chronic stress over time is caustic. So it's going to break down muscle, it's catabolic. It can weaken that already delicate small intestinal lining. So more leaky gut, more autoimmunity, more opportunistic infections. We know this also dysregulates glucose. So glucose is such an important hormone, but if your cortisol levels are high, as will your glucose and your insulin. So if you're already dealing with body composition frustrations, sometimes it can be related to chronic stress, not to mention the fact, as I jokingly say, show me a woman who doesn't manage her stress and show me a woman who doesn't sleep. And I think the other layer of that conversation is really that the things that allow us to be incredibly successful in our teens, 20s, and 30s may work against us, may become maladaptive in our 40s, 50s, and beyond. And so I think a great deal about the research that's been done on PTSD, adverse childhood events, and trauma. And so, for a lot of women in the setting of declining hormones, changes and alterations in neurotransmitters, they struggle. And these are very accomplished, very successful women who suddenly cannot emotionally regulate, or with the setting of declining hormones and changes in neurotransmitters like GABA, dopamine, serotonin, their coping skills are not what they once were. So this is why I suspect we see, 70% divorce rate for women in midlife, and many of whom women are initiating the divorces. And I think in many ways we haven't done a good enough job helping women understand what to anticipate in midlife. What are the things they can do there and that their partner can help understand? I always say that partners that are with you through the midlife transition are generally people that are willing to weather the lack of predictability in some instances of the things you're experiencing. Because one day you may feel one way and one day you may feel completely differently. But I think for a lot of individuals, understanding that these majoring in the majors are very important, and then addressing significant underlying trauma, adverse childhood events. And I like to always mention that I trained in inner city Baltimore. So when I trained, we talked about big T trauma, rape, murder, suicide, things that no one will argue are incredibly traumatizing. But we don't think about the little T trauma. We don't think about the bullying, the abuse, the neglect, all of these things that cumulatively can be equally caustic in susceptible individuals and can lead to a point where if their nervous system gets rewired in their younger years, that can also set them up for struggling in midlife. And that's a lot of what I see. That I will sometimes say when a woman says, I've done all these things, I'm coming to see you, I'm a new patient. And I'll sometimes just say, do you have a trauma history? And they're always taken aback. And I'm like, the role of trauma. I mean, I think a great deal about Gabor Mate's work and The Body That Keeps the Score. I can never remember the author, which is terrible, but it's been this way for years. How instrumental their work has been to me personally to better understand my patients and their behavior and to be able to help them at a deeper level. Because I think that it can be really easy for women to say, okay, I need to manage my stress, I need to sleep, and I need to eat right, and I need to exercise. And they're like, why am I still not feeling better? And so that's the part of the conversation that I think is enticing for me because I've been doing this for so long that I think it's that more nuanced conversation that I'm much more interested in. I'm like, don't tell me about the slapping on the estrogen patch and thinking everything's going to be okay, because I think the nuanced conversation is everything needs to be personalized. Every woman might need a little bit of a different approach. And I think in functional integrative medicine, we've gotten to a point where we have overcomplicated things. Patients are overwhelmed. They're paying exorbitant fees for out-of-pocket testing. By the time that they get to us, they're really frustrated. And so that's why I always say major in the majors, and then we work backwards. Like once we've dialed in the sleep and stress management, then you're going to have a larger bandwidth to be able to do more and try more and see what other levers need to be, accessed to see what's most effective.
Yeah, absolutely. It really highlights the point that everything is connected. I
Hmm.
mean, it just, what you said, your gut, your trauma, your sleep, your all the things, it's all connected. And we tried for so long to isolate each of these things, and we just can't. The body doesn't work that way, especially the female body when our hormones change. So it's so validating now that we can have this conversation and talk about all the things that are changing. So when you say major in the majors, what are the majors again? Will you repeat them again?
Sleep,
Mhm.
stress management, nutrition, and then exercise. And so obviously there's
Mm.
things
Mhm.
behind each one of those.
Right.
But I always say before you buy the next gadget, focus in on these things because you're going to get much farther along. I cannot tell you how many women come to me and they are chasing every single bright, shiny object. And I'm like, I get it. I love gadgets. I have tons of gadgets. I get lots of free stuff. So I get to try all these things out. And I recognize that's a privilege. However, before someone that's listening, before you go buy an Oura Ring or a Whoop band, like dial in on these things that are far, like the sleep hygiene, the managing your stress, which is not 5 minutes of meditation on a Thursday, the anti-inflammatory nutrition, which might look a little different, and really prioritizing protein and fiber. I now refer to fiber as the new F word because it can be incredibly polarizing for a lot of people, and the right types of exercise. So, like strength training, zone two training, flexibility work. I'm of the age range that we were taught thin is in and cardio is queen. And I tell people all the time, I'm not suggesting that not being physically active is acceptable. However, we need to focus less on these classes where people are just mindlessly, spinning on a bike or mindlessly jogging mile after mile without being intentional about the types of exercise we are doing because we know muscle mass is precious and we know flexibility work is important. And I talk about how in my neighborhood we have lots of hills. There's nothing about Central Virginia that's flat. It is very hilly. And I get zone two in just walking my dogs. I don't even need to add a weighted vest. I don't need to add anything else. It's that easy where I am. And I know where you are, beautiful, outdoorsy. People are very physically active, but being intentional about everything you're doing because it does make a big difference.
Yeah, it made me think when you were saying that about all the devices and everything. It's amazing the effort people will put in and the price people will pay for those fixes that they want. But it's those things you're speaking of, the majors, that are harder to get dialed. It's just not as sexy, but they really are the ones that move the dial. And the fiber being the F word, that's funny. I love fiber. I'm a big advocate. Of course, everyone needs to do what's right for their gut at the moment, but that's funny.
No, no. And people
The
get, I mean,
F
I've
word.
had actual podcast hosts say you can't talk about fiber. And I'm like, then it makes it hard to have a conversation because I will explain physiologically why fiber becomes so much more important.
Yeah.
And I'll be the first person to say, when I left that hospital in 2019 and had 6 weeks of antibiotics. I went home with a PICC line. I was sick as stink. I still went home with a ruptured appendix. I was too sick to go to surgery. 6 weeks of antifungals, 6 weeks of antibiotics. It took me about a year and a half to tolerate any fiber. So when your microbiome is decimated or
Yeah.
damaged, it can make it harder to tolerate fiber. So I use it again as a litmus test. Like, is this someone that we really need to aggressively work on replenishing their microbiome, the constituents for their microbiome to heal before we can get more aggressive? And I hate to use the word aggressive, before we can get more persistent or thoughtful about how we're going to repair the microbiome. That's important information. If someone says, I don't tolerate vegetables, I
Hmm.
don't tolerate food or fruit, elimination diets aren't designed to be forever, meaning if someone's doing AIP or an autoimmune protocol, or if someone's doing Whole30, it's not designed to eliminate those foods forever. Our bodies are not designed, we're designed to be omnivorous, is the point I'm trying to make. That I think it is very important, but what may work for you may be very different than what works for me. And that's okay. That's the bio-individual approach. But when patients are fearful to eat fruit and vegetables or legumes or nuts or seeds, I'm like, oh boy, there's something bigger going on here that we need to look at.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because when we have dysfunctions in our gut and we avoid foods for too long, then we can get other issues
Mhm.
from that. So, even in the same way, I'm sure this is also a topic of your book, but the protein
Mhm.
that's going on right now. And of course, protein is so important. But if there's a gut issue and someone can't break down their protein, all of these things are just messages that our gut needs support, maybe not just that the food is bad.
Yeah, well, and I mean, think about how many women eat on the go. They eat standing up, they eat when they're yelling at their kids or their spouse. And so, literally understanding from a very basic perspective, the autonomic nervous system, there's a time and a place to be in sympathetic, and there's a time and a place to be in the parasympathetic. And if you are not literally in the right side of the autonomic nervous system, you're not going to be primed to be able to produce saliva, produce adequate hydrochloric acid to break down the protein into amino acids, to produce enough digestive enzymes, to properly break down and emulsify fats. And fun fact is estrogen's declining. We don't break down fat quite as effectively because it's so intricately involved in bile acid synthesis. And so I always like to point out to patients like at that level, and then also you're not going to be able to break down, absorb, assimilate, or detoxify. So, or even eliminate, forget that. So I think for a lot of women, understanding that maybe what you got away with in your 20s and 30s, things start to change. And I used to dictate in the hospital, standing up, dictating, eating a protein bar or drinking a protein drink and trying to see patients because we had such little time to actually be able to eat. Whereas now, when I sit down, I'm generally seated, looking outside, 4 to 5 deep breaths before I start speaking. You want to know that you have saliva actually collecting in your mouth. Like I have a Bernie Doodle puppy, and he's a character, but when he starts to salivate, it literally it like drools out of his mouth onto the floor. So these are all these unexpected things. You pick a particular dog and you don't realize they have all these peculiarities, but his saliva production is so significant and profound that it becomes a running joke in my house. And I'm not suggesting we should have saliva drooling out of our mouths, but the point being, like when you are sitting down to eat a meal, you should feel the increase in saliva production in your mouth, unless you have a physiologic reason for why that doesn't happen. But I think for a lot of people, we overcomplicate. We really overcomplicate things that should otherwise be fairly routine and simple, but we've overcomplicated them in our modern day lifestyles.
Yeah, the modern world makes it really hard on our hormones
Hmm.
and on our gut.
Yeah.
I mean, everything you're saying, it speaks into the fact that perimenopause is this big magnifying glass of any imbalances we had in our life. It makes us, or if we want to feel better, it asks us to get more focused on what's best for our body. If that's digestion or stress processing, it just really demands that we pay more attention, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, the gut is so fascinating for so many things. We don't have that much more time, but what about leaky gut? That is so big in and of itself. And I've seen so many research papers about how symptoms in perimenopause are worse when we have increased inflammation in our body. Changing hormones create more leaky gut creates more inflammation. Do you see that being a thing as
Yeah.
well?
Yeah, no, it's a huge problem. And I think most people aren't thinking about this in their 30s. They're not thinking that, oh, my chronic stress, my overexercising, my multiple doses of antibiotics I've taken throughout my lifetime, or even, the glyphosate that's sprayed on foods. And we can make the argument that yes, you buy organic, but glyphosate gets into the air. I mean, we are, and that's a chelator, it's a pesticide, herbicide. But I think for a lot of people, it's the cumulative net effects of a lot of these choices that can worsen leaky gut, make us more susceptible to autoimmune conditions, 4 to 5 times more likely in midlife and beyond. And so I think about, again, why the conversation is important to start when women are younger so that they're aware. Like I think about my generation, all of us were on oral contraceptives for every, symptom you could find imaginable. So we were kept in a low estrogen state for
Mhm.
many years, even preceding perimenopause. And so I wonder, I don't have any research to reflect on this, but I'm wondering when we're looking at, specific age ranges of women, how that sets us up for perimenopause and beyond. Are we already kind of behind the 8 ball? Are we going to have to work harder? For me, I was diagnosed with my first autoimmune condition after receiving appropriately dosed antibiotics for Lyme, got psoriasis. That was like autoimmune condition number one. Then I got another one after I had my second son. Then I got another one in my 40s. And so I usually say once you've had one, you're more likely to have others. And I don't share that to be scary. I mean, all of my stuff is in remission because I'm gluten free, I'm dairy free, I manage my stress, I do all the right things. But I think for a lot of women, you just have to be more thoughtful and intentional with lifestyle choices as well as stress. Like stress is so undervalued. People don't respect the role of stress and how it imprints us. Like I am one of these people that is always very calm on the outside. I always say it's like a duck paddling across a lake. They look very calm on the outside, but they're paddling furiously under the water, but no one sees that. And so it's interesting how a lot of us have a very calm exterior and we don't perceive that we're under a lot of stress, but our body may feel completely differently. So that piece about stress management, really finding things that you are drawn to doing. Like I always say, my husband and I take our three dogs out for a walk every morning, and I connect. I really feel a strong sense of connection to nature because it's very green here. It's very quiet here. There's a lot to look at when we're walking the dogs. I get sunlight on my retina. I mean, it's really a great way to kind of start the day. So, connection to nature, grounding work, which, thankfully we're entering a warmer time of the year here. We can put our feet on the earth. Meditation, breath work are all really, really integral for helping our bodies get out of that fight or flight and get more into that parasympathetic, which I think most, if not all, of my patients really have to work on intentionally.
Yeah. So hormones, stress response, the immune system, the gut, it's all connected.
It absolutely is.
Yeah, even bones, right? If women are having a hard time building bones, it can be
It's
rooted in
not
your
just,
gut.
yeah, and it's not just about losing estrogen. So we know estrogen creates and supports osteoblastic activity. So that's building bone. And then progesterone on the other side is like a seesaw. So it's osteoclastic. So they're working together like a seesaw until we go into menopause. And then we get an upregulation and bone breakdown. Interestingly enough, the gut has a lot of connection to the bone. So there's a gut bone axis. And as I mentioned in the book, I spent a whole chapter talking about the gut and the gut bone axis. If we have a leaky gut, we have leaky bones. And that's a connection many people aren't making. And I remind people that yet another reason to consume fiber is that when we consume fiber, it goes through our digestive system, goes to the large intestine, it ferments. And from there, our body makes short chain fatty acids. They do a lot of very important, these are signaling molecules. They help with inflammation, they can cross the blood brain barrier. They're important for stabilizing osteoclastic activity. So the bone breakdown piece can be stabilized or improved upon by consumption of these fibrous things that go on to become short chain fatty acids. So I remind women the conversation around fiber is not just about helping with mucus production and reducing inflammation and creating endogenous GLP-1 regulation in conjunction with keystone bacteria. It is also about this bone stabilization piece that, again, I could not get people interested. Like I kept saying, like, this is one of these things in this book that I was so stunned, and the research is so solid that we aren't talking about this enough. It is not just about primary prevention with an estrogen patch, although that is important. I want to be really clear. I dutifully wear my estrogen patch because I want to avoid developing osteoporosis, along with doing other lifestyle measures. But equally important is that fiber consumption. Here is talking a lot about protein consumption and strength training and jump training and all these other things. I'm like, we need to be talking about fiber and its role in helping to support bone synthesis and stabilization.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Yeah, colorful fibers. There's so many reasons
Mhm.
that it's important, and it's wild that it's connected to the bones too. The gut really needs to be the primary place we focus, in my opinion. Obviously, in your opinion, you wrote a book on it. In menopause, we can really affect so many different symptoms and areas that are of concern as we grow older. I could ask you a million more questions, Cynthia. I literally just have so many things I would love to talk to you about, but we're out of time. So everyone needs to go get your book. I'm going to go get your book. Why don't you tell us where we can find your book?
Yeah. So the menopause gut, you can go directly to my website, which is www.cynthiathurlow.com. It'll take you to, if you little banner at the top, you can click on that. It'll take you to your favorite bookstore. As I tell everyone, I try to be really sensitive to the brick and mortar businesses that are out there because since the pandemic, I think they really have taken a huge hit. But Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, Books a Million, they're all carrying the book. And I'm really proud of it. It's the probably the thing I've done professionally that I'm most proud of because it's helping so many people. We have amazing reviews on Amazon. If you buy the book, please leave a review. My team reads each and every one, and we take the menopause gut really seriously. It is not just for women in menopause, it is for women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond. It is for women in menopause. And yes, the term postmenopause is how we usually talk about it. Menopause is one day in the life, but it really is helping women better understand their physiology. And quite honestly, we explore supplements, hormone replacement therapy. Each one of these majors that I've talked about, we explore as well as trauma and stress and the research there as well.
Brilliant. Thank you for that gift to all of us. And thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. Bye bye. Thank you.
You're welcome.
In the meantime, keep playing, and here's to aging our best.